Today we'll be talking about the hardest move ever. But before we begin, house rules are outdoors only.
Yeah, we're talking about outdoors only. We did have a little think about some of the indoor moves that could be talked about in this area. Definitely the first move on the Burden of Dreams replica, which Will said was 8B plus, maybe 8C as a one move boulder.
That's pretty hard.
It's pretty hard. And the other one that came to mind was Jan Hoyer, who did 1.9 on a campus board.
Which that one had totally flown me by. I didn't know that. I mean, physiologically, Jan is in a position to do that because he's huge.
Yeah, it's not something that is even possible for most people. But then I guess that's what we're talking about here, is the impossible.
Right, so what about dynos, Are they in?
No.
And the other thing as well is what constitutes as well a single move? Because are we talking about a single move in isolation or a single move as sort of part of the extended problem?
Yeah, so the way that I've been thinking about it is if someone spotted you into the starting position of the move. So for Burden of Dreams, the first move, for example, which is one of the moves we're going to be talking about, you don't really have to think about that because it is a sit start. You're going straight off the ground.
But if you were to try to say the middle move.
Exactly, yeah. Someone would almost be spotting you into the starting position, and then it's that move from that starting position, fully rested. You don't have to kind of climb into the position because then that adds a whole kind of other can of worms to think about.
Yeah, so if it was the last move of a long traverse, or say for instance, a long problem up a big boulder with the crux right at the top, and it's that cumulative fatigue that makes the sort of difference and that actually makes it the crux as opposed to it being actually the hardest move. We're discounting that within this conversation. That is not a part of it. We are just talking in isolation, pure brilliance, providing it's not a dyno.
Providing it's not a dyno. If you built scaffolding up to the move and then could get straight on it and do it, that's how we're thinking about it.
Why is it not a dyno, Zar? So the contenders. First up, in no particular order, Lucid Dreaming in Bishop, California. What do you got to tell me about it?
Yeah, so we're looking at the big move. There's two kind of iconic hard moves, which I can't remember exactly how Daniel Woods described them, but it was something like from a sharp shark's tooth to a glassy quarter pad mini pinch. And then it's the next move that is a big move to a really, really small edge with the right hand.
Is it a big move, Zar, or did Daniel maybe describe it as a dyno?
Listen, Daniel may have described it as a dyno, but it's not a dyno in the sense of two hands on, single big move to a small edge or a big edge.
You've got a combination of an extremely steep gradient coupled with, I don't even know, a shark's tooth crimper and then a quarter pad mini. I don't even know what a quarter pad mini pinch is. All I know is that a quarter of my pad, that's not much pad.
It's not a lot of pad.
And that's not even the hardest move.
I think that this is a really good boulder for looking at all the things that can go into a single move. Because it's not just the holds that you're going to, but also the holds that you're going from. So if you've got a tiny, tiny pinch, a quarter pad mini pinch, which is glassy, by the way.
That's not going to help you.
It's not going to help on the left hand, and you've got a really, really sharp hold on the right hand, and the hold that you're going to is, I think he says another kind of rounded half pad edge. So every hold is awful, and the feet are awful.
And then the cut
and it's loose. Overhanging, and you're cutting loose, not dynoing.
So it's the whole package.
It's the whole package. There's a lot that goes into that move. And I think it was Magos's longest boulder project. Obviously, he's mainly known as a sport climber. But I also am pretty sure that when Daniel did that move, he said that I think he tweeted that he'd just done the hardest move that had ever been done in rock climbing.
So Lucid Dreaming, first climbed by Paul Robinson, originally graded 8C+, downgraded by Paul Robinson a little later to 8C.
Yeah, it's when you're thinking about the hardest moves and the way that they link into the grade, it is difficult because you then might think, well, if it's the hardest move of an 8C boulder,
it doesn't make it an 8C move.
It doesn't make it an 8C move, and how can it be harder than the hardest move in a 9A boulder like Burden of Dreams? But you know, it's all about kind of breaking it down and thinking about the climbing that surrounds the move as well. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's any easier than 8B+. It could be an 8B+.
And has anyone offered a grade for this individual move?
As far as I know, nobody has proposed a grade for that single move, because that didn't used to be a thing, but now it is a thing with boulders like the replica of Burden. It's every boulder's being broken down into these moves.
It's not only a thing, but now we've created a thing talking about the thing as well. And in fact, that moves us on to the next contender, which is indeed Burden of Dreams, the first move. And Will Bosey, ever a man to, break down the details, has mooted a potential what for the first move?
Yeah, so in the interview that we did with Will, just before he actually climbed Burden of Dreams, he said that the first move on the real boulder with slightly better friction than the replica was 8A+ or maybe 8B.
Will's not into his soft grading these days, I'd say. He is a man, I think, who... Will, if you're watching this, don't take this the wrong way. It's meant as a compliment. But does he realise how good he is at the moment?
His kind of rise to arguably best boulderer in the world has been so kind of stratospheric, and so it's happened so quickly that I think it would be really hard to understand that he is potentially the best boulderer in the world. It's kind of, when I spoke to him, I asked him kind of, do you realise, does it get easier to kind of understand that you are one of the best boulderers in the world? And he was like, there's still kind of doubts there. And it's like, well, how can there be? You're one of the only people to have ever climbed 2 9As.
What do you think's changed it for him? Do you think it's the beard?
Oh, yeah, maybe. Haven't thought about that.
You've got a beard, so I'm just...
Maybe I need to shave
You've come
mine
on
off.
a lot in the last 12 months.
Could be that.
So Burden's first move, anyway, it shares a little in common with Lucid Dreaming insofar as it's steep, but actually not as steep, I don't think. I mean, I've seen Lucid Dreaming in the flesh. I haven't seen Burden in the flesh. I've never had reason to go there.
Yeah. It's not like there's lots of climbing on the same part.
It doesn't look as steep. I may be getting that wrong. Sorry, peeps. But the holds look similarly shambolic.
Yeah, there's a lot of similarities between the two boulders in that they are both going from relatively poor handholds to a relatively poor handhold on a massive overhang with poor feet. And I think the other thing that we can look at in terms of Burden of Dreams is the number of people that have really, really struggled with that first move. And obviously Will had a lot of time on the replica and then he was able to do it quite quickly. But we saw some of Sean's videos on his YouTube channel. Sean really, really struggled with it. Obviously, it took Nally a long time to kind of piece it all together. And the first move was the one that really, really kind of made things difficult for him. And the same with Toru as well, who's invested a lot of time in the bowl.
So Lucid Dreaming has had a few repeats. Burden of Dreams, obviously just the one. Right, so far, themes have been small crimps, steep gradients, and this leads us neatly onto the next problem, which is floating. Now, when we watched this, just prior to us filming today, the move that is the standout for me on this is I don't even know how to describe it. It's like a down climb campus catch, snatch thing. And that looks horrific. That alone is that for me is the jaw-dropping move. But here's the spoiler.
Potentially not the hardest move on the boulder.
That's potentially not the hardest move on the boulder. It's the first.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, so in the video of floating, the first ascent was by Ryuichi Murai. So in his video of floating, it's incredible to kind of see him working out. There's so few holds and he spends so long working out the best way to do it, and he explores so many different options. But the way that he eventually decides to do the first move, and the only way he can seem to do it, is through essentially a campus move from these two poor crimps. He tried it with feet on, couldn't do it, so he actually does it with feet off and up to another really, really poor crimp, bit of a theme, with his left hand. And I think he did the boulder itself in 11 sessions, but it took him a good few sessions to even work out how that first move was going to be possible.
Talking on a bit of a theme, Zara, again, but that sounds like a little dyno-esque to me. Big campusy move. Where are we drawing the line here? Arbitrarily.
It's a big move, but it's not a dyno. That's the line.
Thanks for the clarification.
I think also another thing that kind of is linked into this is we're looking, maybe I hadn't thought about this beforehand, but in terms of the feet on boulders, and this is taking the poor foothold to the next level where they do not exist.
Yeah. So this one gets some additional kudos because it hasn't yet seen a repeat, has it?
Yeah, so it's in Mizugaki, Japan, and it's maybe not seen as many attempts as some of the other boulders. Not unlike Burden prior to the last year, not many people have tried it.
Everyone's tried Burden.
I know that Toshi Takeuchi is trying it now, and he's managed to get that first move. So you could say that it's probably a matter of time before.
The rest of it's a path.
Yeah. If you haven't seen it, check it out. The rest of it is not a path.
Next up's a bit of a curveball here. James Squire, Devon's finest, on jumping to conclusions, font 8B. But this actually differs a little from the current theme because it doesn't exclusively consist of overhangs and crimps. The start does look pretty crimpy, but the actual crux of this move is in the sort of coordination catch at the top.
Yeah, you may have been able to clock the moment where Rob was talking there where I realised that this is in fact a dyno.
Oh no.
But we're talking about it nonetheless. So, sorry, the reason that I included this one was partly because I was thinking about hardest individual moves and I was thinking about one move boulders. And I saw that James had recently put up this boulder, jumping to conclusions. And it's essentially a one move 8B. So if you're thinking about...
We've really come up with a strong stand against dynos.
Yeah.
What is it? Let's take it back, Zara. Is it like the donkey style dyno, like 2 jugs to a big jug? Is that what you stand against?
Yeah, not so much dynamic movement as it is, the two... The thing that I think we can't include is a dyno that is hard because of the distance between the holds.
Because otherwise you could get like an NBA basketball player and they'd do it. You've got to have like
Exactly.
they're not going to be doing jumping to conclusions, are they?
No.
So they probably will.
No.
Would now be an appropriate time to move on to the man who represents the opposite end of the noise spectrum.
I think so.
If there's one person who wins the award for, if by hardest move, we mean loudest power scream, there's only one climber we're going to be talking about here, and that's Adam Ondra.
Mr. Adam Ondra.
What have we just watched? What have I just heard?
So we've just seen Adam Ondra on Christian Core's Goya in Varazze, Italy, an 8C plus boulder, and specifically we're looking at this move where Adam, he starts with kind of crossed over on what looks like an absolutely awful edge, and then we're seeing a lot of core tension, we're seeing a lot of coordination, essentially. He's going out to, again, another tiny edge with the right hand and then being able to coordinate his feet through to what looks like, to be fair, the best foothold that we've seen on any problem that we've spoken about today. But it's the coordination, the horrible handholds.
And this differs a little because actually with things like Lucid Dreaming, Burden of Dreams, you've got quite a board style problem, and with floating to an extent.
Yeah.
With this, it's a little bit more three-dimensional, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you go and check out the video, you'll see that he's going out to an edge to the right, but then actually there's a kind of almost a roof coming out. So his body is working a lot more. There's a lot more kind of, as we said, core tension and working out kind of how to position the body. And it does really seem as though grabbing the edge is most of the difficulty, but even once you've got it, there's a lot of coordination to kind of think about still.
And this isn't the only problem that the big man has done that is probably a contender for the hardest move ever. Vasil being the other.
Yeah, so Vasil, which is Adam's 9B plus route, one of his 5 9B plus routes, I think, but the one that we actually know the least about. But he's essentially said that the move itself was 8B in its own right, and he described the route as pretty much a 1-move route. And he also said that when he was projecting the route, he would get to that move, get completely shut down, and then actually just hang on his rope, fully rest, try it again, and still just be absolutely shut down. So as we were saying at the very beginning, even going into this move fresh, he was really, really struggling with it. The flip side of that is, can we say really that the hardest move is part of
inconveniently located a few bolts up?
Yeah, absolutely. So
sky bouldering.
It's, yeah, but then, you know, if you built that scaffolding up to it, it could be, and you going into it fresh, he still was really struggling. So he said there were many days when I thought I could do it, but in the end, I couldn't do that move even as a single move. Hard move.
So we can't talk about hard moves without talking about Charles Albert, aka the Barefoot Climber.
Barefoot Charles.
Absolute legend of the Fontainebleau climbing world.
Mm-hmm. So the climb that we're talking about and the move that we're talking about is on Charlatan, and it's this really kind of interesting move where I am struggling a little bit to think of it as the hardest move ever, just because of how in control he is when he does it.
And your point here was almost like, if you can sort of almost climb a move, sort of almost statically, so like lock in and then go, if it looks in control, if it looks that in control,
yeah,
can it be the hardest? But
then maybe that's getting into the whole silent assassin sort of thing, you know. If you can control the power screams, we don't know how hard he's trying. It could be that he's on the absolute limit. But also another thing to think about with Barefoot Charles, of course, is the fact that he is barefoot, and we haven't really seen anyone else trying this boulder. So
are you insinuating, Zar, that maybe if someone like came along with a pair of climbing shoes and tried this, it'd be 6B plus or something like that?
Always, let's find out. Let's go.
Coming to a UKC video near you.
Yeah. Average climbers try barefoot climbers' hardest boulders, but with shoes.
I think it'd be a short video. So why is this problem in here then?
So this boulder was featured in a Real Rock film about Charles, and he did this move for the first time, and when he fell off trying the subsequent move, he said, I've just done the hardest move I've ever done in my entire life. And actually, the boulder itself remains unclimbed. No one's done it. So he's done that move, but unlike all of the other boulders that we're talking about today, the boulder itself still hasn't been climbed.
So you say it's the only one that hasn't been completed. I'm gonna skip ahead a bit in terms of our agenda here and bring forward the Wild South knee bar eliminate. Now this is a bit of a curveball here because Will Bosey a few weeks ago climbed the Wild South, his Font 8C at Raventor. But as he explained to you in the video interview that you did with him, he'd found this knee bar that basically was a game changer. It went from basically being impossible through to being possible. He actually sounded pretty gutted about it.
Yeah, I think that was the word that he actually used. He said, I'm absolutely gutted, yeah.
And this kind of potentially changed it from being what it may have been, which is a Font 9A. Now we're talking, I mean, it'd be absolutely eliminate and dare I say it, totally pointless. But Will seems pretty up for a good pointless eliminate, and that's what I respect about him. And I wonder whether he would ever go back and try it without. And that move as well, he is yet to do.
Yeah, and it's the one that he's invested the most time into. So I think he actually did somewhere in the region of 20 sessions on the boulder, and then 17 sessions in, he finally committed to the knee bar. And it wasn't even that he hadn't spotted it. It was that he knew it was there, And he just thought, I'm not using it, because he wanted to do the hardest move he could possibly do. Then after trying the knee bar, he got it in around 3 sessions. But, you know, this is what we're talking about today, the absolute hardest move. And in terms of, you know, thinking about the best boulderers on the hardest boulders in the world.
Here we have
one of the best boulderers in the world having invested more time into this boulder, this obscure eliminate at Raven Tour, than any other boulder in the world. And actually, from Will's perspective, I think this is probably the hardest thing he's ever tried.
Which is amazing.
Which is brilliant. Just down the road, let's go.
So Zara, when you were thinking about this video, I know you were trying to err away from these outright board style problems, trying to think of some which bucked that trend. And one of the things that you thought of was Aidan Roberts on the first ascent of Isle of Wonder sit. Now, it is a little bit boardy, but at the time, of course, you were thinking about this, it was unrepeated. And of course, Will Bosey just launched his video of him making the second ascent with sort of ease almost.
Yeah, he definitely, I think when he topped out, he said that was a struggle, but it didn't look, does he ever look like he's struggling really? But anyway, so the reason I chose this one to kind of include was it is slightly more static, and it's a little bit more kind of full body shouldery rather than tiny holds.
Definitely not a dyno.
Definitely not a dyno. And when Aidan was talking about it, he was talking about this really intense shouldery sequence. It's kind of the kind of iconic picture that we would all think about if we think about the boulder, if we know the boulder, is that big kind of right shoulder dependent move. And I know that Aidan initially thought that he was too weak for it and actually had to go away and train for a long time to eventually do it. Will's ascent has kind of muddied the water a little bit because he found an alternative beta, which maybe made that move and the most difficult moves on the boulder a little bit easier.
And this is particularly, you know, it's centered around that shouldery move on the sit to Isle of Wonder.
Yeah. So when I was thinking about this move as potentially one of the hardest moves, I was thinking about Aidan on the first ascent because that was at the time all we had. And when Aidan does the move, he has his right hand kind of on this edge out to the right, and then he moves both of his feet far out to the left, and he's pressing all of his weight through this right shoulder in order to control a kind of cross through with the left. And the way that Will's complicated that is by putting a right heel in while he does that cross through. So instead of kind of pressing into the shoulder, he's also able to pull with his right heel. So it is the hardest move on the boulder, and it is kind of the crux that makes it potentially an 8C plus boulder. Obviously, Will has managed to kind of work his way around that. So it's an interesting one to think about because they technically kind of did different moves.
It's one of the interesting things, isn't it, about grading a first ascent. You know, you are ultimately just going off experience and your own beta at the time, but beta gets refined. You know, there's so many examples of first ascents who maybe haven't used the most efficient sequence, but just because that was the sequence, they just figured out the way that worked for them. It'd be interesting to see someone like Aidan go back again and try Will's method, because there's a very real chance that, well, either one, Aidan would find it really easy and wonder why he ever did it a different way, or two, that sequence just wouldn't work for him. Works for Will, wouldn't work for Aidan. And it's also worth remembering as well, Aidan's come on so much since he made that first ascent that, you know, I've no doubt that he's stronger, basically. He, much like Will, has just their rise to greatness has really been stratospheric within the last sort of 12, 18 months. And so, yeah, it's a hard move.
It's a hard move. And it's also worth thinking about the fact that you've had Aidan proposing 8C+, Will proposing 8C, slightly different methods. There's not a consensus yet. You know, it's one of the hardest boulders in the UK, and it's going to take more people trying it with both different methods to work out where it really stands kind of in that grade range.
On the note of there being no consensus then, the awkward question, which is the hardest move ever? And I'm aware that I'm asking someone here who has not stepped on or seen any of these boulders in the flesh, but your YouTube research has been, par excellence. So, what is your answer here? What do you think? What is the hardest?
It's difficult. I'm looking at the list here and my eyes are going to Wild South Knee Bar Eliminate.
Wild South Knee Bar Eliminate I like simply because of how ridiculous its inclusion is.
Yeah, but also if you look at the data, so I
Don't go scientific on me here with data.
I think that going into this, the obvious contender is Burden of Dreams, the first move. It's had so many of the best climbers of different generations trying it. It's had Nally on it, Daniel, Jimmy, Will Bosey, Sean Rabatou, Aidan Roberts, Toru Nakajima. All of these amazing climbers have been on it, and all of them have said, as far as I know, yeah, that first move is really, really hard. And some of them haven't been able to kind of do it or do it reliably. So then if you have Will, who was able to do it and do it reliably, and he's found this other obscure boulder even harder, does that make it the hardest move in the world?
That's science. So I'm going to come up with a bit of a curveball here, Zar. I am not going to name which I think is the hardest, because obviously you've got that dialed down with the data, and I don't want to argue with the data. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to tell you my favourite, which is completely subjective. But if there was one on that list that I could watch on repeat for a period of time over and over again and just be amazed by its floating, I think that is the movement, the whole thing is stunning. And also it just suspends disbelief whilst watching it.
It's truly mind-blowing. And I think also the fact that I know we said that we're only talking about the one move, but I think if we had a slightly broader list, that boulder would arguably have two moves in that list, that both the first move and the next kind of downwards campus that you described as your kind of favorite move earlier on. It's an absolutely incredible boulder.
Many thanks to Nathaniel Soon for providing the inspiration for today's video. You can read his article on site, and there's a link in the description below. Zar, thanks also for coming up with some seriously curveball ideas. I look forward to talking again soon.
Absolutely.